So for the past couple of years, you and I have been witness to the secret of the success of Korean car manufacturers. Step one was get people to take you seriously. Step two was make the vehicles look attractive. Step three was make a crossover that you can sell for sort of a lot of money. And now there's a step four, make that crossover sort of rugged. So to understand what's different, we have to recap what this is. Obviously, it's a crossover, but specifically it's a mid-size crossover. Technically, that's 114.2-inch wheelbase, but that means nothing looking at this thing on video. In reality, it's a little bit shorter wheelbase than a BMW X5. However, this is a bit of a miracle in packaging because it has a usable third row in the back, which the BMW, it's got sort of a third row, but I wouldn't call it usable. Then there's the whole rugged thing. That's what's changed here with this one, the X-Pro. It's got 0.4 of an inch more ground clearance, and that works in conjunction with different wheels and tires. Just remember, the last Telluride you and I drove had 20-inch wheels. This 18-inch wheels for more of an off-road application. Then there's what's underneath the hood, and there really no change. It's the 3.8 Atkinson cycle V6, 291 horsepower and 262 pounds of torque. Then there's a fuel economy, and here they talked a big game about this when it first came out, but it really hasn't changed. 18, 24, 21. Now let's press on to the currency of the crossover and SUV world. And just as an aside, this I would not classify as an SUV because it's not body on frame. It is unibody, but still we need to discuss towing. Now the basic front wheel drive or even all wheel drive Tellurides, that's 5,000 pounds of towing. This, the X-Pro, they bring it up to 5,500 pounds of towing. Now as part of that, they've also reprogrammed the traction control, yes, for the towing, but more importantly, to be more effective off-road. Greetings from just outside of San Antonio, Texas. Stunning road for us to try 4,455 pounds, or depending on how you express your weights and measures, 2,020 kilograms. Now, huge point of order, this is the fully kitted out X-Pro all-wheel drive. If it was the basic LX front-wheel drive, it would be over 300 pounds lighter with that. Oh, the gearing is great on this one. It gets off pretty well, and we've driven this engine before. They really haven't changed the engine, really the way it delivers power. You know, it's kind of a misnomer. You think with that amount of torque we just discussed, there'd be a delay. Here there wasn't, and that's a big function of the 8-speed torque converter automatic. It's beautifully matched to this engine and works very well in this application. I would argue the best application is around town. This is not the kind of vehicle that one's going to be doing rock crawling with. So really the torque converter works well, not just in providing some off-the-line acceleration from an engine that frankly doesn't have a lot of torque, but really good smooth shifts. And that's really the mission of the vehicle. Overall, things like, oh, that was a turtle. Thankfully, we did not hit him. Okay, so I couldn't help myself. I had to stop and meet the locals. Now this one, he's not particularly friendly, but I can see why he is a Texan, because he certainly stands his ground. Anyway, back to driving. Okay, now let's put all that aside and focus on really what this is about, and that's how it rides. And here it's more about the ride quality than driving dynamics. And the biggest difference really between this and the first Telluride that you and I have driven is this whole X-Pro thing. Now, what does that mean in terms of real hard differences? Well, it turns out it's got a higher ground clearance. So this is 8.4 inches as opposed to 8 inches. And then the wheels and tires on this are smaller than the last one we've driven. That previous Telluride that had 20-inch wheels, and 20-inch wheels are still on offer. However, this one, they've got some sort of bend to make these things off-roaders. This one has the 18-inch wheels, and there, I have to say it does improve the ride quality a bit. Now, it's kind of like a trade-off. You feel, I don't want to say a choppiness, but you feel a different kind of composure here because of that ground clearance on road. Is it a huge difference in the overall ride quality of the vehicle? No. It's still one of the best ones out there. Like, you see these things in fancy towns like suburban Los Angeles, suburban New York, suburban Chicago, and people have traded in Audi Q7s for this. And it's not just because they're saving 25 grand, it's because of the way the thing drives. Like everything, even down to the steering. The steering is light, but it doesn't feel like over boosted. The best way to describe it, it's got what I call a replacement theory, meaning if someone is no longer interested in spending 75 grand on an Audi, but wants the same kind of equation, this delivers the same kind of ride. Put another way, are all those chassis control systems worth $25,000 or more in Delta? I would argue no. If the mission is driving the Rugrats around to school, if the mission is to make it a weekend toy, that's where they diverge a bit. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game, Mind the Options game, with today's contestant, one of the best crossovers on the planet for like the past 3 years, now revised for 2023. This one, the Kia Telluride X-Pro, which is kind of like the Subaru-ized version of a Telluride. It's also the most expensive one on offer at $52,785. Now a huge point of order. The most basic one, the front-wheel drive LX, that is no longer $32,000. That is now $35,690. And a huge note here, navigation and LED headlights are fitted as standard to all of them. Then there's this one, it has everything, like the heated and cooled seats, the leather seats, dual sunroofs, although an interesting point on the cheap one, the sunroof can be had on the cheap one, and believe it or not, it's like the cheapest I've ever seen a sunroof in like 20 years, $600. But that here is fitted as standard. This one does have some options fitted to it. That stunning midnight blue. Think of it as a shade or two lighter than Sunoco livery blue with a little bit of gray in it. Either way, you must pay extra for it, $495. Then that lovely interior that offers a magnificent contrast. That's called terracotta. You must pay extra for the color, not the leather. That is $295. Then, believe it or not, on a $53,000 vehicle, you must pay $210 for floor mats. Let's go back to what we said at the beginning part of this episode. Get people to take you seriously. That includes throwing the floor mats in. Anyway, the only other thing we add is the destination handling from West Point, Georgia, $1,335, which brings us to a total retail price of $55,120. Okay, so if you and I are being honest with one another, thus far there aren't a hell of a lot of differences between this and the Telluride you and I drove a couple of years ago. However, on the inside, that's where we have a couple of changes. We talked about in the tech review this different dashboard where they have this screen, or really two screens, underneath one piece of glass. It's something we've seen in other Kias thus far. It works well here, but I would argue the UX integration is better here because they've kept hard buttons, knobs to control the HVAC as well as the radio, where they didn't do that in the EV6 as well as the Sportage. So they've done away with the haptic feedback here. Little feedback to the folks at Kia, please, let's continue with this, not the haptic feedback. Then the other change here, that you really can't see, the tactile feel. This was a bargain at 50 grand when it first came out, and most people bought the fancy one, and here again, we're driving the fancy one. But they've made this one a bit better on the inside. Yeah, you can see it's got like the Bentley-esque diamond stitch, there's that, but it's more all the points you touch are better. In the first one, the top of the door panels, the dashboard, it felt, if I'm honest, kind of chintzy. Here, that's not the case. The only time you feel bad tactile feel is when you get really low in the vehicle. Be very, very quiet. We have visitors here on the set. That's my buddy Whitey over there. That's his brother here. And then, I don't know what to call him. His antlers, he's only got one set. Obviously, he personifies the statement in Texas, come and take it. Someone apparently did. So I do not know what's going on with Hyundai, Kia, and all these other car manufacturers that are saying we've got to go off-road in these crossovers. But here we go again. This is a vehicle that is more rugged. I wouldn't call this thing something you're going to take rock climbing or Moab. So with that, let's go ahead and lock the differential. And basically what we're doing here is we're splitting the torque 50-50 front back. So the most you can send in the back is 50 at any one time, even when you lose traction on road. And then there's a couple of other things that change here. The biggest being, there are changes to the suspension. Like for example, the springs and shocks in this car, the X-Pro, are longer than in all the other versions of the Telluride. Now we'll say, remember we were talking about the ride quality on road, and it's somewhat compromised with the extra 10 mils of ground clearance. But here you can see it's passable. Like, this is somewhat of a rut challenge, the most we're probably gonna do in a vehicle like this. And it works, it doesn't embarrass itself. I would say this is the kind of off-road system that one would take the kids to the trailhead, or let's say for the sake of discussion, you are on vacation in a national park and you do want to do a little bit off-roading. It's capable. Okay, so this is probably more challenging than what we did with the Hyundai Palisade. And the point here is to test the hill descent control. Don't want to scrape the bottom here. So one of the things they added, in addition to those longer springs and shocks, there is hill descent control. So the vehicle is taking care of the braking here by itself, not me. That's something that would come out of, say, like a Range Rover, a Land Rover. So I give them some credit that they put some technology that would work in a situation like that. I didn't expect the Telluride to do that. Okay, so this looks fun. This is a bit of a rock guard. Remember, we did this last with the EQS 580 out in Colorado. This is, it works. It's interesting. This is more feedback on the steering than it is can it do it or not. I felt a little lightness in the steering going through that, more so than we did in the EV we last did that trick with. So I keep on going back to this whole ground clearance thing, 8 inches versus 8.4 inches, and this is where it makes a difference. We're getting to the crest of this hill here. Something that would be 8 inches or lower would literally bottom out, and here we're able to clear it without any issue. Okay, so let's do a bit of a test of the weight transfer here. This, I take my hat off to Kia. They've got balls to put a $52,000 vehicle through this. I wouldn't do this to my $52,000 vehicle. Oh, hey now. Wow. Oh, hey now. Oh, here we go. Weight transfer. Oh, there we go. That was fun. I'm duly impressed. Again, I wouldn't take it rock crawling, but it's better than one would expect. I would argue that's probably better than most, like, Subarus. Because if I'm honest, the popularity of the Subaru Outbacks, that's what made Kia and Hyundai do this whole trick with the X-Pro. So full disclosure, I hate to be repetitive in these episodes, but what you and I discussed in that recent Hyundai Palisade episode, that all applies here. This is still one of the best crossovers on offer. It's just a matter of design between this and the Palisade that one would prefer. The only thing I do have to add is, since you and I have driven that Palisade and now this, we drove the Kia Niro EV, and I told you in that episode that the pricing was gonna be like $40 for the basic and $45 for the one we drove. Turns out the pricing came out, and that's exactly what it is. And when you look at that for $40 and $45 respectively, and you look at this for, what is it, 55 grand for the fancy one, but still a really nice one can be had for 45, you see what we're getting at when we're discussing that 45 is too much for that little car. When you look at something like this, and really it's a function of, do you buy the car by the ounce or do you buy it by the pound? Which brings us to the wish list. And here, the same as in the Hyundai episode. It could use some more power, but I'm not looking for a fancy like V8 or more power from the V6. This really would benefit from a plug-in hybrid because the majority of these things that are sold are the fancy one. So I do feel there's price elasticity, maybe another 10 grand to make a plug-in hybrid. How about like 50 to like 100 miles of range? Then you could use it on EV throughout the entire day. But I am just one man, and this is the point of the episode where I turn this around to you guys to opine in the comments below, or via our social media, MotoManTV on word, MotoManTV on word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to share a little bit behind the scenes here. To get to this location, we had to pass a Buc-ee's, which is like one of my favorite places on the planet. It is so ridiculous. But it turns out Buc-ee's, last year, they kept 2 Texas towns alive when they had that deep freeze. Buc-ee's was the one that had like all the food, all the gas for 2 towns that had less than 25,000 population in each town. And with that, until I see you in the next episode, bis später.